Hey everyone, Bandit here. So VaatiVidya finally went live with his phenomenal new lore video about Elden Ring, and oh my god! Was really happy to see that we agree on most of the interpretations. Just a little confidence boost for myself since all of this lore is so muddled and debatable, which Vaati himself even said in the video. And Vaati is very much so the guy when it comes to lore accuracy. So yeah, it made me feel good. Anyway, I just wanted to point out that because his video is live and so well put together, I'm not going to be taking the time to explain the basics of the world of Elden Ring in every video. I'm just going to be creating these lore breakdown videos with the understanding that everyone's already seen VaatiVidya's video as kind of a foundation to build off of. Cool? Cool. So yeah, on to this video's topic, which is going to be all about the Numens. You know of them, you've heard their name even if you weren't looking for it, and here's a spoiler alert for you, they're extremely important to the story. And I'm going to break down all the information we can see in-game and some interesting theories surrounding their origin in a way that anyone can understand. Also, spoiler alert, in general, for the video, you've been warned. The Numen race is mentioned several times in the game, but first and foremost on the character creation screen, which is like the first thing you see in the game pretty much. When you're choosing a race or preset or whatever to base your character off of, one of the selections is Numen. The selection says that the Numen are the supposed descendants of denizens of another world, long-lived but seldom born. This is the only race listed here that is described as coming from another world entirely, which already kind of gives them the sense of great importance. And if you combine the description of the Numen here with the description of Marika's hammer, you can corroborate the information, since the hammer says it was created in the lands of the Numen outside the lands between, aka another world. Now that's great and fine and all, but you might be wondering, why should we care about some aliens from outer worlds? Well, as you might recall, not only does Marika's hammer come from the lands of the Numen, but so does Marika herself. The Black Knife Assassins were all said to be Numen women with close ties to Marika. The Numen's rune also states that the Numen come from outside the lands between and are in fact of the same stock as Queen Marika. And all of this is pretty much saying without saying that Marika equals Numen. Now, something interesting that I was able to find that might not mean much, but is still cool enough to mention, is the fact that the word Numen is actually Latin for divine will, or, get this, goddess. And FromSoft has actually used Latin in Elden Ring and other places as well, such as the lyrics to the song that the Bat Women sing, so it looks like the land of the Numens means literally the land of the goddesses. And if we were to run with this for a bit and open up a can of speculation, the word Empyrean that's used in-game to describe those who are fit for godhood means of the heavens, or divine in English. And through some deep dives into the Elden Ring subreddit, I was finally able to come across a Japanese translation of the word Empyrean, or rather the original non-translated Japanese. Similarly, the Japanese word used there is Shinjin, which according to the user Tumnaselda means god person. Now, I don't know why they didn't just use the same word, but what it sounds like to me is that being an Empyrean and being a Numen might be one and the same. And I mean, think about it, all of the known Empyreans besides Marika in the game, right? So Ranni, Malenia, and Mikola are all each directly related to Marika and are pure of blood, coming from a single god. And for the theory about Ranni coming from a single god, check out my previous Ranni video, and for the theory about the mysterious gloam-eyed queen who was also an Empyrean, check out my Melina video. Anyway, point is, as a side note that ultimately doesn't have much to do with the actual content of the video, it's possible that being an Empyrean means being a Numen or a direct, pure-blooded descendant of the Numen. But that's neither here nor there, so let's get back on track. We know the Numen are a mysterious, possibly divine race of people who hail from outside the lands between. But how did they get here? Why are they here? And where is their land anyway? Is it possible to know any of these things for sure? Yeah, it is more or less. So let's start with that last question. Where is the land of the Numens? For the answer to this one, we're going to do a little cross-referencing starting with the Black Knife Assassins. Like I covered earlier, they're all said to be Numen women. That much we can tell directly from their armor description. However, if you progress a bit into Roger the Sorcerer's questline, he will eventually begin to talk to you about the Night of the Black Knives, which is the fateful night in which the Rune of Death was stolen and used by the Black Knife Assassins to kill the soul of Godwyn and the body of Ranni. Roger, being a straight-up LBPD detective, tries to figure out who done it. As a part of his research, he was able to figure out that the assassins who carried out the deed were, quote, scions of the Eternal City, a group entirely of women arrayed in armor of silver under cloaks which fooled the eye. This matches up perfectly with what we know to be true true about the Black Knife Assassins being both women and arrayed in silver caped armor. So we have no reason to not believe what Roger is saying, but something he said should stand out to you. He didn't call them Numen, he called them scions of the Eternal City. A scion, by the way, in terms of humanity, is a descendant of a royal or important family, which lines up with what we know the Numen to be, descendants of denizens of another world. So clearly he is talking about the Numen. Thing is, he claims that the Numen are from the Eternal City. As you probably remember from playing the game, there are 3 Eternal Cities called Nokron, Noxtella, and one that's unnamed, and they're each located far beneath the ground. But is that far enough down to be considered outside the lands between, a different world? I mean, it's definitely a long way down, that's for sure. It's debatable, but there is some soft proof that it is to be considered outside the lands between. If we read the map description for either the Ainzel or Siofor rivers, it states that the great rivers flow beneath the lands between, which, given their depth and great nature, could be interpreted as being outside the lands between. There's also the fact that the entire Lake of Rot is down here, which is said to literally house the essence of an outer god, also known as the Scarlet Rot, and the fact that the Mohgwyn Palace is down here that's supposed to be the capital of Mohg's dynasty in service to another outer god called the Formless Mother. Combine the presence of these other outer gods that are not the Greater Will, the descriptions of the Great Rivers, the fact that multiple Numen's runes can be found down here, and the fact that the Black Knife Assassins are said to be Numens who come from both the Eternal City and another world, and you're left with the probability that the lands underneath the lands between are in fact considered another world. I mean, there are even actual stars hanging in the sky down here, so clearly there's something weird going on. Anyway, if the Numen and therefore Marika herself came from the lands underneath the lands between, that opens up a whole can of worms, because you know what the Eternal Cities were known and destroyed for? Defiance of the Greater Will. The civilizations that lived down there, who came from the surface and predated the Age of the Erd Tree, by the way, were responsible for creating the Fingerslayer Blade, which Ranni eventually tasks you with retrieving in order to slay her own 2 fingers. The defiance of the Eternal Cities is why the tyrannical Greater Will devastated them, and why they are now filled with monsters and are only a shadow of their former glory. But if Marika, being a Numen, came from the people who used to live in the Eternal Cities, then this just gives a much better understanding as to why she double-crossed the Greater Will. Just to remind everyone, remember that Marika shattered the Elden Ring, an act which the Greater Will called a trespass, because that's kind of their entire connection to the lands between, locking her up within the Erd Tree as punishment. But Marika predicted that they'd do this to her and had already set in motion a plan for the Greater Will to, out of desperation, offer grace once again to her first husband Godfrey and his Tarnished, who would then eventually venture to her imprisoned body and rid it of the control of the Elden Beast. Now, nobody debates whether or not she betrayed the Greater Will, but what people do debate is why she did it. Until now, everyone just kind of assumed that Marika got cold feet about this whole Vessel of the Greater Will thing and decided to shatter the Elden Ring out of anger at the Greater Will and the death of her firstborn. But if she were to have come from the Eternal Cities, then all of a sudden it makes sense. It could be that Marika did all of this, became queen and vessel for the Elden Ring in the first place, in order to do what her fellow Numen previously failed to take down the Greater Will. She rose to power and surrendered herself to the Greater Will and accepted the Elden Ring and Elden Beast into herself in order to destroy it, which is what happens no matter what at the end of the game. It's a nice bit of lore diving, but right about now you're probably thinking to yourself, what about the other Numen women, the Black Knife Assassins? Since we know that they are closely related to Queen Marika and are of the same stock, doesn't that then imply that Marika and the Black Knife Assassins are on the same side and that she probably orchestrated their plot? But if she did set the Knight of the Black Knives in motion, then why would she have them kill her son, Godwyn, the firstborn and favorite of Marika, the one whose death was kind of a big deal? That is a great question, and of course not one that can be answered without a bit more theorizing, but hey, why stop now? See, like Vati said in his video, there are several reasons to believe that Marika actually orchestrated the Knight of the Black Knives. One of the biggest reasons is, of course, that she is a Numen, just like the Black Knife Assassins, which is already a super huge connection, but another reason is that her shadow, Maliketh, was said to have been betrayed by her. Now, I always thought this was weird. Like, how was Marika supposed to have betrayed Maliketh, when all she really had him do was defeat the Glowmide Queen and her Godskin Apostles, then keep a watch over the Rune of Death? Was that supposed to be her betrayal, just asking him to do that? I'm not really seeing much betrayal here, except for I guess the fact that Maliketh becomes addicted to eating Deathroot, but that doesn't make a lot of sense because he wasn't like that until he embedded the Rune of Death within his own body, which didn't happen until after it was stolen from him on the Night of the Black Knives. Aha, light bulb. See, while I was puzzling over this notion of Marika's betrayal, lo and behold, behold, a savior, a timely Prometheus of lore descended upon my Twitter DMs, sharing their take on this very subject with me, who they called their favorite lore person on YouTube. I know, I'm not gonna cry. Anyway, Roxaf pointed out that if you kill Maliketh as Gurak the Beast Clergyman, he will ask Marika why she would gull him, why she would shatter before passing away and not finishing his sentence. Don't ya hate when people die before finishing their sentences? So annoying. The word gull, by the way, means to deceive. So again, we have proof that Maliketh was deceived or betrayed by Marika, but how? Well, like Roxaf points out, what if the betrayal was the theft of the Rune of Death? See, in my previous videos, I've stated over and over that I believe Marika was the one who removed the Rune of Death, aka Destined Death, from the Elden Ring, spawning the Golden Order, like Enya tells us. And this is still true, I think, but it was most likely not something Marika did of her own volition. Roxaf brought up the fact that this logically has to be the case, because if Marika removed Destined Death against the Greater Will's will, then why should they not permit its return? Enya tells us straight up that the Fingers and Greater Will itself would not allow its return, meaning that the Greater Will most likely commanded Marika to remove death from the Elden Ring in order to ensure that their reign via the Elden Beast inside Marika was eternal, in order to allow the Greater Will to rule over the lands between forever. And this is what created the Golden Order that we know of today. Back to Maliketh though, if Marika had him take the Rune of Death but then orchestrated its theft for the Black Knives, which then led to Maliketh destroying his own mind over embedding the Rune of Death inside his very body, then that could be considered deceit or betrayal. Either that, or she betrayed him by shattering the Elden Ring and turning against the Golden Order, but it just feels strange to single out Maliketh as the only person she betrayed in that case. Either way though, it does seem very likely that Marika masterminded the stealing of the Rune of Death in order to combine it with her other initiative, which would be the god-slaying weapon that she was having Hugh create, and therefore combine them to forge a weapon imbued with the power of the Rune of Death capable of killing an outer god. However, this is where Ranni comes into play. Remember that Ranni claims to have stolen a fragment of the Rune of Death in order to create the Black Knives through fearsome right. So what if this means that Ranni hijacked Marika's plans and stole a fragment of the Rune of Death and used it for her own rise to power? Now, I go into much more detail regarding Ranni's full story in the Ranni Explained video, so I won't explain everything again here, but remember that Ranni is an Empyrean, a pure-blood descendant of Radagon, aka Marika the Numen, and in my opinion, that probably means that Ranni herself was also a Numen. She did show some strange connections and knowledge of the Eternal Cities and their hubris. She knew of the Fingerslayer Blade's existence after all, and her associate Iji wears a mirror helm, which is supposed to ward off interference from the Greater Will and is extremely similar to the Nox mirror helm, which is also supposed to ward off the Greater Will's interference and is part of the Nox set. And you know who the Nox people are? They are the very people who long ago pissed off the Greater Will and were banished to, you guessed it, the Eternal Cities. But you might be wondering, doesn't this mean that the Nox are the citizens of the Eternal Cities and not the Numen? Listen, don't be put off that some races of people have multiple names, like the Nox potentially being the Numen, or an older version of them. In the first place, since the Numen are so rare and only pop up every now and then, it could be that they are simply a specific bloodline or family within the Nox people. And since this game loves multiple names for the same things, like the Erd Tree probably being the Great Tree, or the Dusk-Eyed Queen probably being the Gloam-Eyed Queen, or Renna being Ranni, or Margit being Morgut, it is entirely possible that both the Nox and the Numen could both come from the lands underneath, and are therefore both connected to one another geographically and in their defiance of the Greater Will. Anyway, it could be that Ranni simply convinced the Black Knife assassins, her fellow Numen, to murder her own body and Godwin's soul in order to aid in the rise of Ranni's Age of the Stars. Perhaps the Numen women began to lose faith in Queen Marika after so many years of her apparent devotion and complete service to the Greater Will. Ranni, on the other hand, promised complete destruction of the Greater Will and the Golden Order, which is what the Nox and Numen have wanted all along, and this may have been enough to convince the Black Knife assassins to follow through with her plans, even if it meant killing the innocent Godwin. I think it's also interesting that Godwin's body turned up afterwards in the unnamed Eternal City, which is where the Numen women might have called home. However, I also think that the fact that the Black Knife assassins showed up to kill Ranni's associates Iji and Blythe after her questline was done is very important. They must have lost faith in Ranni and swung back to serving Marika or the Greater Will at this point. It's not clear. I'll admit, this part has me stumped because there are no pieces that explain this. But anyway, the fact that Ranni and Godwin both died led to Marika's legitimate dismay and forced her hand into shattering the Elden Ring since she no longer had a handle on the Rune of Death, which of course led to the Shattering War, which led to the Greater Will reviving the Tarnished to quell the nonsense and restore the Elden Ring, and the rest is playable history. But the Numen, no matter what you may believe about the lore of the Elden Ring, are undoubtedly right in the middle of it all. And that, my friends, is my theory about the women of Numen and their significance in the story as a whole. But what did you guys think? Are the Numen women from the Eternal Cities below, and did they really betray Marika by following Ranni's orders to assassinate Godwyn? Or is this all just a bunch of baseless speculation and the women of Numen really are just aliens from another planet? Let me know in the comments below. Also, thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed it, or at least my efforts into making it, please consider leaving a like on the video, as these videos take lots of time and brain power to put together. And subscribe if you haven't already for many more lore videos to come. Huge thanks as always to my bandit crew, of which I have the fabulous Xander B to welcome into the fold. That's all I've got for this one, so as always, I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. This is Bandit, looking forward to seeing you next time, and signing out. Peace!